Hey guys, Metal Viking 82 here, back to show us more plunder that I've acquired over the last little while. Yes, finally a collection update. I know I've done a lot of reviews starting this year, but I gotta do it while I'm motivated and everything, and plus there's been so many cool things that are out and coming out that I really wanted to talk about. But today I'm going to show off some stuff that I've had for a little while. It's an order I placed with a really cool label called Doomed to Obscurity Records, and yeah, they are based out of Sandpoint, Idaho, and focus mainly on death metal, but these bands are kind of obscure and not known to the masses, mainly because maybe they only released an EP or a demo or two, sometimes maybe even a full length, and then they either change their name or they split up, or it's unknown where they are and nobody really knows who they are. They basically take these and give them the reissue treatment, and sometimes this is the first time this stuff has ever been put out on CD. And I've found some really cool stuff on here, as you will see. So this first one is actually a freebie that they sent with my order. I was looking at it and I was listening to the stuff on Bandcamp, and I was like, I mean, it sounds okay. I'm going to check it out a little bit more before I decide whether I'm going to buy this and I can get it another time. And went ahead and paid for my order, and lo and behold, it finally arrived. And this was in there. I was like, oh, well, they must have known I was going to end up buying it. I don't know. But this is Disordered with Exhuming Post-Mortem Hymns of Evisceration. Yeah, these guys were a brutal death metal / grindcore band from Salt Lake City, Utah, active between 1991 and 1997, and featured ex-members of Malignant Inception and Dying Fetus among their ranks. And this is basically a compilation of their Disfigured Corpse and Within the Mind of a Mortician demos from 1996 and 1994, respectively. What's weird, though, and I've seen other places do this too, is that they put the 96 demo on here first and then the 94 demo after it. Which, if this was a reissue of, the 96 demo and they were adding the other one as bonus tracks, I can understand, but I don't know why they would flip-flop them like that. But, yeah. Basically, starting off with the Disfigured Corpse demo, the intro and outro on here, while cool and everything, especially the outro, because it has this like 80s sci-fi feel to it, I think they just kind of seem unnecessary for a demo, and that's a point I can definitely agree with Necrotic Nick about. But yeah, other than that, you got dirty, crunchy guitars, mid-pace grooves with some pinch harmonics that get the head banging, but they also have some faster sections sprinkled throughout. A nice thick tone bass that's easily heard throughout while not being too high up in the mix. Solid drum production for a demo, I have to say. He doesn't really do anything overly flashy, but there's lots of nice blast beats and double bass throughout. And you get a variety of vocal styles on here, almost a little too much at times, it seems. You get mainly like this low guttural growl with the occasional mid-range growl that almost brings to mind Masse Broberg, excuse me, who was on the early Hypocrisy albums. You also get some screams and wretches, which just sounded absolutely nasty, and there's even some pitch shifted vocals, so you kind of got that, carcass worship kind of thing going on there in terms of the vocals. And then you get to the 1994 demo, Within the Mind of a Mortician. Now, this, of course, is going to have a slightly rawer production, but not too overly raw or anything. Longer songs on that demo, with two of them actually reaching the 7+ minute mark. The bass really comes through more than the second demo I found, and it sounds, nice and sick with this thick, warbly rumble. Then when you get into track number 7, Necrosodomy, at about 2:57, it gets a moment to kind of shine by itself just briefly with its, just it and the drums going before the guitars, launch back in at about 3:08 with a nice chuggy groove. And then in track 10, the closing track on the CD, Into the Morgue, it gets another moment to shine for about the first 15 seconds of that song just by itself before everything else kicks in. I love the drum production on the first demo a lot more, and again, he doesn't really do anything flashy, but he's certainly got some seriously good blast beats and double bass going here. Let me change my notes over here. But yeah, now the guitars on this second demo still have that dirty, crunchy tone to them, but they're mostly fast-paced on that demo, with some more mid-paced, grooves at times, and even kind of slow it down to almost like a doomy death metal style at times, such as in, again, track 7, Necrosodomy. At about 1:03 in, it gets slow and crunchy, and just especially at the 1:12 mark, it's nice and heavy, really doomy sounding. And then at the 2-minute mark, it goes back to this nice mid-pace gallop. Yeah, the first demo, I should say, Within the Mind of Mortician, was definitely my favorite on here. Because it has more of that old school brutal death metal sound that really appeals to me. I like the Disfigured Corpse demo a lot, more with each listen. I still want to check out the full length album that these guys put out, because they put out one album in, I think, 97, and then they split up. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. All right, moving on, we have Septemberist with Diabolic Delusions. Yeah, these guys were a death thrash band from Madison, Wisconsin, active between 1994 and 1996. This is a reissue of their 1995 demo, Diabolic Delusions, with their 1994 self-titled demo as bonus tracks, limited to 300 copies. On this one, you get, heavy, thrashy guitars, thick bass, but that seems a little bit buried in the mix for the most part. Solid drumming, though, with some nice patterns, rolls, and fills, and blast beats at times. Not very often. The vocals are a nice, powerful, lower register growl that kind of brings to mind Sauron on the debut Decapitated album. They kind of seem slightly forward in the mix, though. They're not too overpowering, but they seem really out there, really up forward in the mix. But when you get into the self-titled demo, the bonus track, and despite having that slightly raw production, the bass is higher in the mix, and it comes through more clearly. You really get a good idea of that thick tone that it actually has. Drum-wise, they're still solid, but in this case, you get more instances of blast beats than on the second demo, and, the guitar work is still fast and thrashy. The vocals are still powerful, but not as forward in the mix. They kind of settle back a little bit more, kind of blends really well with the rest of the instruments and everything. But yeah, really good stuff. Oh, this one was definitely one of my favorites of the group. This is Excoriate with Dead Molestation. Yeah, these guys were brutal death metal out of the Oakdale, New London areas of Connecticut, active between 1991 and 1993. The archives did say that they apparently must have reunited briefly in 2011. I'm guessing maybe for a show or two or whatever. But now they're still listed as split up, but it's never really been announced officially when they actually split up for the second time. But yeah, this is their sole demo that was independently put out by the band on tape in 1992. This reissue is limited to 500 copies, and then 50 of them are special editions. You got 25 that are like this with the clear case and a red tray, and then you had another 25 that had a red case and a red tray. But yeah, this thing right here absolutely wastes no time hitting you with the fast guitars and the blast beats as soon as you hit play. Thick, twangy bass, scything guitars, sick sounding drums with lots of nice patterns, rolls, and fills. Good double bass. Love the blast beats and these powerful low register, though not quite guttural growls. Like I said, definitely one of my favorites from this order. All right, another favorite of mine from this, Bathum with Into Darkness. Yeah, these guys are listed on the archives as black/death metal. They were out of the New Brighton, Pennsylvania area, active between 1989 and 1992. They actually changed their name back to their original name, which is Sathanas, and they are still active, apparently, though it seems like all the members on this lineup for this demo here are no longer in the band, so not sure what's going on there. But yeah, this is a reissue of the band's third demo from 1990, originally put out on tape independently. This is limited to 500 copies, and yeah, this thing just got very thrashy sounding guitars with some absolutely killer guitar solos. They're kind of Slayer-esque at times, I found. The bass is nice and thick, not too high up in the mix, but clearly meta throughout. The drums had that almost, rehearsal roomish quality, mainly due to the kick drum sound, I think. But I still love the drum sound on this thing overall. And while they're not, doing anything overly flashy, they still got really good patterns, rolls, and fills, and I loved his double bass work on here. The vocals actually kind of remind you of David Vincent on the Altars of Madness album, with just a little slight black metal tinge to them, which, you know, honestly is probably about the only kind of black metal element to this. This sounds more like thrashy death metal to me. Obviously, I've not heard any of their other material, because like I said, they did have at least 2 other demos. And I want to say maybe an EP. So maybe that has more black metal into the sound, but this just sounds like thrashy death metal to me. But I still would highly recommend checking this one out. Next up, this one actually took me a few tries. You know, I liked what I heard when I was initially listening to it before I ordered it, but it actually took me a few listens to kind of really get into it a little bit more. This is Dethroned with Creating Heavenly Impurities. Yeah, these guys were a death metal band from New York, active between 1992 and archives didn't really list a date, but they are considered split up. This actually features an ex-member of Immortal Suffering, and also an ex-live member of Mortician in its ranks. This is their sole demo. It was actually self-titled, and they renamed it for this reissue. But it was put out on tape by the band in 1996, only limited to like 50 copies. This reissue is limited to 500 copies. The guitars on here have this heavy, dirty tone to them. Lots of fast-paced riffing on here, but they do slow it down to a more mid-paced gallop and groove at times. The bass, while not too high in the mix, can be heard rumbling away with this nice thick tone. And it has a little bit of a techie feel to it at times, I found. The drums sound decent. I mean, it's probably about the weakest thing on this thing. There's some nice blast beats and some double bass on here, but I feel like at times they get a little bit buried in the mix, to where all you can really hear is the kick drum coming through. So yeah, that's kind of a bummer. But, you know, other than that, everything else I thought was pretty solid. Excuse me. The vocals are kind of like a John McKenty-ish style growl, but they also use these deep, croaked vocals that kind of bring to mind Demolish at times. And according to the band, there was no vocal effects used on here for those vocals, which if so, damn. Those actually first appear in the second track, Obsession with Homicide, but the best example of those style vocals comes at 128 into the third track, Hemorrhagic Fever. Just absolutely fucking inhuman sounding. It is unreal. But yeah, another one to definitely check out. All right, these last 4 are, again, some of my favorites. And the last 2 I'm going to be showing are actually ones that really made me, you know, really excited to see listed on the Bandcamp page. And I was so glad to finally get copies of those. But these next 2 I'm going to show are both by the same band. And that is Disgorge. Yes. The most common fucking band name when it comes to death metal. Especially brutal death metal. But yes, this particular Disgorge was actually a brutal death metal band out of Sweden, active between 1991 and 1996. And we have their Espousal Bleeding demo and their Strangled demo. This one was their debut from 1994, put out on tape by the band themselves. This one came in 1995. Both of these reissues are limited to 300 copies. Starting... I get my page flipped here. Sorry, I got lots of notes for these things. Yeah, starting with the Espousal Bleeding demo. Yeah, right off the bat, the bass really stuck out to me. Thick toned, easily heard throughout, just absolutely crushing sounding bass tone on here. I thought they had a really killer drum production on this thing. Lots of really nice blast beats and double bass. The guitars aren't overly polished or anything, but they still have a nice crunch to them. Fast and thrashy, kind of old school death metal style riffing, but also like to slow it down for some more mid-pace sections and really slow chugged riffs. They also have some really nice solos on this thing. A good example is track number 2, Importunate Sermon, at about 2:09, and then in track 4, Insanity, at about 4:40. Absolutely killer solos there. Nice mid-range and very powerful sounding growls. I absolutely love the hell out of this thing. As I did this one here, when you get into Strangled. Now, here's where you start to hear a little bit of a difference in their sound, just a little bit. The bass on this one is still thick, though not as thick as on the debut demo. And also has a little bit more of like an Alex Webster-ish feel to it, I found. And, you know, despite that having a slightly different production on this demo. The drums still kicked ass, still really solid drumming on here. The guitars sound a lot crisper on this demo as well. Just, you know, thrashing, absolutely scything, I think, with some mid-pace gallops and crunchy chug sections, and again, some more killer solos, such as in track number 2, Provided Blindness at 142, and probably my favorite solo on this demo comes in track 6, the very last track, Endless Being, at about 226. Amazing solo in my opinion. The vocals on this one are still powerful, but here he adds in even lower growls as well, and some nice screams at times. Again, another kick-ass demo. I just do not understand why this band, despite having, you know, a very common name for death metal, did not get bigger than what they did. And the last two, again, are by the same band, and this is a band that I discovered recently, recently I should say, within the last little while, because of another CD that I got from Comatose Music that actually was put out by Doomed to Obscurity. And of course, I always look at the members and see what other bands they were in, and I saw this, and of course, you know, only thing I could find to where I could actually listen to these demos was a SoundCloud page. And I thought, man, I'm never going to find these damn things. I can't even find a Bandcamp to download these or anything. And just decided one day to go on the Doomed to Obscurity Bandcamp, and I saw these in there, and I immediately added them to the cart, and then I just kind of dove in, and that's where I found all the rest of this stuff. But the band in question is called Fatal Cause. They were a progressive death thrash band from Salt Lake City, Utah, active between 1989 and 1994. Actually featured ex-members of Disordered, who I showed at the very beginning of this video, Wicked Innocence, and Carnal Decimate, which was actually the band that led me to discover them, and then led me down the rabbit hole on the Doomed to Obscurity Bandcamp page to find the rest of this stuff. So what we have here is a reissue of their second demo called Mind Christ, which was released on tape by Ida House Recordings in 1993. And then their third and final demo, Lacerated Vein Graffiti, which was released by 6 Feet Under Productions on tape in 1994. Both of these reissues are limited to 500 copies. Now, starting with Mind Christ, yeah, while I definitely dug both of these demos, this one I kind of like a little bit more. They're both kick-ass in my opinion. This one has some nice thick bass. It's clearly heard throughout, despite not being too high up in the mix, and just really laying down that solid backbone to all the songs. When you get into track number 3, Expressions of Hate, at about 3:48 into that song, the guitars cut out, and it's just the bass and the drums, and you really get to hear that killer tone that they got for the bass on this thing. Speaking of the drums, I love the drum production on here. Really good snap to the snare. I love the kick sound. And while it's definitely some demo quality sounding drums, it's not overly raw or primitive sounding like you would think. And there's lots of really cool patterns, rolls, and fills. And I really enjoyed his double bass work on this thing. You also get mostly fast-paced riffing on here, but they do slow things down in spots. And at times there's these like almost like ethereal sounding riffs that go on. Probably the best early example of this comes in the lead off track, Further from the Seed, at about 141 in, and there's just some really nice solos on this demo, in my opinion. Track number 3, Expressions of Fate, has a really good one at about the 3-minute mark. That's a really good example of the solos you'll find on here. Vocals, for the most part, are this kind of gruff or hoarse style of delivery with more traditional low-end growls at times. And you even get these like bullfrogish sounding spoken word vocals, such again going back to track number 3 during the opening, but especially at the 31-second mark. And that also gives you another example of those kind of ethereal, you know, riffs that go on. So it's kind of weird to hear that ethereal riffing and this kind of bullfrog doing this spoken word part, but it still sounds really badass. All the songs on this thing are 4+ minutes in length, with the longest being about just a couple of ticks over 6 minutes, but they flow so well, in my opinion. You get so caught up in them that you don't even really notice how long the songs actually are. And then we get into their last demo, Lacerated Vein Graffiti. God, I cannot talk today. Now, the songs on this demo range more from the like 3 to 4 minute mark, with the longest being just a few ticks under 5 minutes long. The bass is still thick, but now with a little twang to it. But to me, it seems a little bit lower in the mix. Not as easily heard as on the previous demo, but it still cuts through in spots. I loved the bass intro to track number 2, Separate Minds, with that slow picked riff soon following right after. In track number 3, In Concrete Confined, at about 2:48, it does get a brief moment to shine and really give you an idea of the tone that it has, because otherwise it's very low in the mix, I think. Then in the last track, track 4, The Pain of Laughter, that song actually opens with the bass and this cool little drum pattern. And to me, the bass actually takes on that sort of ethereal feel that the guitars did in spots on the previous demo. Very cool sounding. The drum production on here is slightly better, I think. Still a solid performance from the drummer overall. The guitars have a less polished and still crunchy feel to them. Still mid to fast-paced riffs, but with more of the mid-paced chuggy grooves and slower chugs. And the solos just absolutely rip as always. In fact, you get into the last track, The Pain of Laughter, at the 2:30 mark. There's one that it's probably one of the bluesiest sounding solos I've ever heard. And I even listened to progressive death metal. And, it made me think of Stevie Ray Vaughan. I mean, it really took me by surprise. I was just listening to it and all of a sudden I was like, okay, that came out of nowhere. But very cool sounding solos. Let me get this last thing flipped over here. Vocally, you still get that, the main vocal style is that gruff and hoarse delivery, but now we actually start to get some clean vocals added as well. And there's still spoken word sections, but this time the bullfrog does not make his appearance. Now, when you get into the second track, Separate Minds, that's the first appearance of the clean vocals. At the 39-second mark, it's almost like he's channeling his inner Phil Anselmo off those early Pantera recordings. And in fact, in the last track, The Pain of Laughter, about 34 seconds into that, again, he brings to mind Anselmo. But yeah, still a really solid demo. Slightly different from the Mind Christ demo, but still really good stuff. So yeah, that is going to do it. I will be leaving a link down below to the Doom to Obscurity Bandcamp, so you can check some of these out. Show this label and these bands of support. I mean, I asked the owner of the label about putting out the first demo for Fatal Cause, but he said, unfortunately, he finally found a good source for it, but, they're not selling that well, and he's afraid to, make CDs of it and have them not sell very well at all. And he's had a few things that just aren't selling as good as he had hoped. And it's a damn shame, because there's some quality bands to be found here that most people don't know. I didn't know of most of these, in fact, all of these, until I started diving into this, Bandcamp. I really dig what this guy does. And it sucks. And I think it comes down to, a lot of times, it's the production. We're so used to how, technology is today and the production that people can get with the demos that they create. Because you hear some demos today and they sound like they've been done in a, big time studio or whatever. And the technology is so much better than what it was in the early to mid 90s. But there's still some quality stuff. These guys put out stuff that, with what the technology was at the day, what was available to them and what they could afford to do. And they still put out some pretty kick-ass music. Yeah, it's rough around the edges, but there's still some quality stuff there. And I wish a lot of these bands had gotten bigger than what they were, because there's some talent to be found here. So yeah, go check out Doom to Obscurity and check out all these. I know I rambled on a little bit more than normal when I do these videos. I'm kind of trying to get to where I can at least do some notes about these releases, so I can just give you a little more idea what they sound like. I did a little more in-depth with these just because I wanted to make this almost like a label spotlight and to really highlight these releases and show that there is some obscure stuff that needs to be heard, and want you to check it out and hopefully show some support. Because, I mean, if the guy only does the, first Fatal Cause demo as digital, I'll still buy it, but I would really love to have a CD. But if it's not selling, I can totally see why he doesn't want to do it. But yeah, you definitely got to show these guys some support. And yeah, that is going to do it. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing, and until next time, stay brutal.